When did you realize your therapist was using your trauma to write her best-selling memoir? I recognized my father's last words on page 127, the exact words he said before he drove into the concrete barrier on Route 9. The words I'd whispered to Dr. Reese during our 4th session while crying so hard I couldn't breathe. Tell your mother I'm sorry I couldn't be the man she needed. Those words were now printed in a book titled Healing Through Darkness by Dr. Caroline Reese, number 3 on the New York Times bestseller list. I was sitting in a Barnes & Noble in March holding the hardcover with shaking hands. My coworker Danielle had recommended it during lunch. She said it was life-changing, raw, honest, filled with real patient stories that would make me feel less alone. I'd started reading at the coffee shop inside the store. Chapter 7 was called The Daughter Who Survived. It described a young woman whose father committed suicide after losing his job. The details were slightly changed. The book said he was a teacher, not an accountant. It said the daughter was 23, not 26. But everything else matched perfectly. My father's depression, the financial stress, the morning he didn't come home, the police officer at our door at 6 a.m., my mother's scream when they told us, the memorial service where I couldn't stop shaking, the guilt that ate at me for months because I'd been too busy with my new job to visit him that final week. All of it was in this book. Written in Dr. Reese's polished prose, packaged as inspiration, sold for $28.99. I bought the book and drove home in a daze, sat in my apartment reading every page, looking for more of my life in her words. Found myself again on page 89. The patient who survived childhood sexual abuse at the hands of her uncle. She'd changed the details slightly again, made him a neighbor instead of my mother's brother, made me 8 instead of 6, but she described the blue bathroom where it happened, the specific way he'd threatened me. No one will believe you because you're just a little girl who tells stories. Those were his exact words. Words I'd never told anyone except Dr. Reese during our 8th session. Words that took me 45 minutes to say because I kept stopping to throw up in her bathroom. She'd held the trash can for me and told me I was safe now. Told me that speaking these truths was how I'd heal. She'd been taking notes the whole time on her yellow legal pad. I remembered watching her write while I talked, thinking how dedicated she was to helping me. She was writing her next chapter. Page 203 had my sexual assault from college. She'd changed his name and the location but kept the details of what he did to me at that party. Kept the exact way I described feeling paralyzed, unable to move or speak. She included the specific detail I'd mentioned about the Red Sox poster on the wall above the bed, and how I stared at it while he hurt me. She wrote about my shower afterward where I scrubbed my skin until it bled. About how I didn't report it because I'd been drinking and thought no one would believe me. Every intimate detail I'd shared in her office over 6 months of therapy was now public. She'd turned my worst moments into content. She'd made money from my suffering. The book had been out for 18 months. It had sold 400,000 copies according to the back cover. Dr. Reese was getting interviewed on podcasts and morning shows. She'd done a TED Talk about healing trauma. She was famous now. Built her career on my pain, and I hadn't known until Danielle handed me that book at lunch. I called Dr. Reese's office the next morning, asked for an emergency session. Her receptionist said she was booked for 6 weeks but could do a phone consultation for $200. I said it was urgent and involved the book. The receptionist put me on hold for 3 minutes, then came back saying Dr. Reese could see me Friday at noon. That gave me 4 days to decide what to say. I spent those days reading the book over and over, highlighting every section that came from my sessions. Found myself in 14 different chapters. Sometimes I was the main story. Sometimes I was a detail mentioned in passing. She'd woven my trauma throughout her entire narrative. Used my father's death as a case study for complicated grief. Used my childhood abuse as an example of long-term impacts. Used my assault as a teaching moment about victim blaming. She'd taken everything I told her in confidence and displayed it for strangers to read on airplanes and beaches. My sister Denise came over Thursday night and I showed her the book. Pointed out the sections that were clearly my stories. She read them with her hand over her mouth. "This is illegal, right? She can't do this." Denise looked at me with horror in her eyes. I'd been researching for 3 days. The answer was complicated. Therapists could write about patient experiences if they changed identifying details enough that the patient couldn't be recognized. It was called a composite. They could blend multiple patients into one story, alter facts, disguise circumstances. The ethics rules said patients should be unrecognizable to anyone, including themselves. But I recognized myself immediately. Anyone who knew me well would recognize these stories too. Denise had been there when Dad died. She knew about Uncle Frank. She knew about that college party even though I'd barely told her details. She changed enough that maybe legally she's covered. I don't know. I need to talk to her first. Denise closed the book and pushed it away from her like it was contaminated. She's a predator. She took your trust and used it for profit. You need a lawyer, not another therapy session. I knew she was right, but part of me still wanted to believe there was some explanation. Some way this was a misunderstanding. Dr. Reese had helped me so much in the beginning. I'd trusted her completely. Friday arrived and I drove to her office in the professional building downtown. The waiting room had changed since my last visit 18 months ago. New furniture, expensive-looking art on the walls, fresh flowers on the reception desk. Success looked good on her. I sat on the leather couch feeling sick. The receptionist smiled at me like I was any other patient, not someone who'd helped build this empire with my trauma. Dr. Reese opened her office door at exactly noon. She looked the same. Dark hair pulled back, kind eyes behind glasses, warm smile. "Come in. It's good to see you again." Her office had changed too. Bigger desk, new chairs, framed magazine covers on the wall featuring her face. Psychology Today had called her the therapist who's changing the conversation. I sat in the client chair and she sat across from me holding a leather notebook instead of the yellow legal pad. "What brought you in today?" Her voice was calm and professional. I put the book on the table between us. She glanced at it and something flickered across her face. Not guilt. Calculation. "I'm in your book. Multiple times. You used my father's suicide, my childhood abuse, my assault. You used everything I told you." Dr. Reese picked up the book and flipped through it casually. "I appreciate you reading my work. Many of my former clients have found it healing to see their experiences represented in mainstream literature. It helps reduce stigma and shame." Her response was practiced, smooth. She'd prepared for this conversation. "You didn't ask my permission. You didn't tell me you were writing a book. You definitely didn't tell me you were using my specific trauma as content." She set the book down and leaned forward with that concerned therapist expression I used to find comforting. "All cases in the book are composites. They're created from years of clinical experience working with hundreds of patients. Any similarities you're finding are coincidental or reflect universal experiences of trauma survivors." I'd expected her to deny it, but hearing the lie spoken so calmly made my hands shake. "My father's exact last words are on page 127. How is that a coincidence?" Dr. Reese's expression didn't change. "Suicidal individuals often express similar sentiments to loved ones. The phrase about being sorry and not being enough appears frequently in these tragic situations. That's why it feels familiar to you." She was gaslighting me, using therapeutic language to make me doubt my own perception. He said, "Tell your mother I'm sorry I couldn't be the man she needed." That exact sentence. I told you that sentence in our 4th session and cried for an hour. Now it's in your book. Dr. Reese wrote something in her leather notebook. "I'm hearing a lot of emotion. It's clear this book has triggered some difficult feelings. That's actually quite common for trauma survivors. They see their pain reflected everywhere because it's so central to their experience. This is called projection." I felt the rage building in my chest, hot and sharp. "Don't therapize me. I know what I told you. I know what's in this book. Page 89 describes the blue bathroom where my uncle abused me. That specific detail. Page 203 mentions the Red Sox poster. Those are my memories. You stole them." She closed her notebook and stood up. "I think we need to end this session. You're clearly experiencing a mental health crisis and I'm concerned about your stability. I'm going to recommend you see Dr. Lawrence down the hall. He specializes in delusional thinking." My mouth dropped open. "Delusional? You're calling me delusional for recognizing my own life in your best-selling book?" Dr. Reese walked to her office door and opened it. "I'm not diagnosing you formally since you're no longer my patient, but I am seriously concerned. I hope you'll seek help. Please don't contact my office again unless you're interested in legitimate therapeutic support." I stood up slowly, grabbed the book off her table, and walked out. The receptionist watched me leave with curious eyes. I made it to my car before the tears came. She wasn't going to admit it. She was going to pretend I was crazy, that I'd imagined the whole thing. She had the power, the credentials, the bestseller status. I was just a former patient with mental health issues. Who would believe me? I spent the weekend researching therapist ethics violations, found the state licensing board website, and read through complaint procedures. Downloading the forms felt surreal. I'd trusted Dr. Reese with my deepest pain, and now I was filing paperwork to potentially destroy her career. But she'd destroyed something in me first. She'd taken my trust and weaponized it. Monday morning, I called a lawyer my sister recommended. Her name was Judith Yang, and she specialized in medical malpractice. Her paralegal scheduled a consultation for Wednesday. I spent Tuesday compiling evidence, printed the relevant pages from the book, wrote a timeline of my therapy sessions with Dr. Reese, including dates and topics discussed. Found my insurance claims showing 24 sessions over 6 months. I'd kept a journal during that time and flipped through it now, finding entries that corresponded with details in her book. One entry from July. "Told Dr. Reese today about the blue bathroom. First time I've ever said those words out loud to anyone. She said I was brave. I felt lighter afterward, like speaking it took away some of its power. I'd been so grateful to her then. Felt so lucky to have found a therapist who understood." Wednesday afternoon, I sat in Judith Yang's conference room explaining the situation. She listened without interrupting while I showed her the book, my documentation, my timeline. When I finished, she leaned back in her chair and tapped her pen against her notepad. "This is complicated. On one hand, the details you're describing are very specific and clearly identifiable to you. On the other hand, she's changed enough surface details that she could argue these are composite cases drawn from multiple clients over many years, proving it specifically you would require access to her clinical notes, which are protected." I felt my stomach drop. "So she can just do this? Take people's trauma and profit from it?" Judith shook her head. "I'm not saying you don't have a case. I'm saying it won't be simple. We'd need to find other former patients who recognize themselves in the book. We'd need to establish a pattern of her using identifiable patient information. We'd also need expert testimony about what constitutes adequate disguise in clinical writing. She paused and looked at me directly. This would be expensive, time-consuming, and emotionally draining. Are you prepared for that? I thought about Dr. Reese in her bigger office with her magazine covers. Thought about her on morning shows talking about healing while she exploited vulnerable people. Yes, I'm prepared. Someone needs to stop her. Judith nodded and opened a file folder. Let's start with the licensing board complaint. That costs you nothing and puts her under investigation. While that's happening, I'll do preliminary research on similar cases. We'll also look for other patients who might join a lawsuit. She walked me through the complaint form, helping me articulate the violations clearly and factually. By the time I left her office, we'd drafted a comprehensive complaint documenting how Dr. Reese used identifiable patient information without consent, violated confidentiality, and exploited the therapeutic relationship for personal profit. I filed it electronically that night. The confirmation email said investigations typically took 4-6 months. That felt unbearably long, but at least it was something. The wheels were moving. Friday morning, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. The woman on the other end sounded nervous. Is this the person who filed a complaint against Dr. Caroline Reese? I hesitated. Who is this? Her name was Lauren Abbott. She'd been Dr. Reese's patient 3 years ago. She'd seen my complaint on some public docket website where licensing board cases were posted. I recognized my story in her book, too. Chapter 12, about the woman who developed an eating disorder after her mother's death. That's me. She described my mother's cancer, the hospice, everything I told her. I thought I was going crazy when I first read it. My heart started racing. You're sure it's your story? Lauren's voice cracked. Page 176 describes the yellow blanket my mother was wrapped in when she died. I told Dr. Reese about that blanket in detail, how I kept it after Mom passed, how I'd wrap myself in it when I missed her. That's in the book. My private memory of my dead mother is in her book. I closed my eyes, feeling sick and validated at the same time. We should talk. Can you meet this week? We arranged to meet Saturday at a coffee shop near my apartment. I called Judith immediately and told her about Lauren. She said this was exactly what we needed to establish a pattern. If multiple patients could identify themselves despite the supposed disguise, it proved Dr. Reese wasn't adequately protecting identities. Saturday morning, Lauren walked into the coffee shop looking exhausted. She was around my age, thin, with dark circles under her eyes. We sat in a corner booth and she pulled out her copy of the book, flagged with dozens of sticky notes. I've marked every part that I think came from my sessions. There are pieces of me in at least 8 chapters. We compared notes, literally, laid our marked copies side by side and went through them systematically. Some chapters drew from both of us. Dr. Reese had taken my father's suicide and Lauren's mother's cancer death and blended them into composite chapters about grief and loss. She'd taken details from both our experiences and mixed them together, probably thinking that would provide enough disguise, but we could each identify our specific contributions. Lauren started crying while looking at chapter 12. I trusted her completely. I was so vulnerable after losing my mom. She told me therapy was a safe space. She promised confidentiality. I believed her. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. I believed her too. That's what makes this so evil. She specifically targets people at their lowest and uses that against them. We spent 3 hours documenting everything. Lauren had kept her therapy receipts and insurance statements. She'd also journaled during treatment. We built parallel timelines showing when we'd each been in therapy with Dr. Reese and when the book had been published. The timeline revealed something disturbing. Dr. Reese had been treating both of us simultaneously during the months she was writing the book. She'd been collecting our stories in real time, taking notes during sessions, and typing them up for her manuscript at night. She'd been conducting therapy with one purpose: content mining. Lauren agreed to join the licensing board complaint and to be part of any potential lawsuit. We exchanged contact information and promised to stay in touch. As she left, she turned back. Do you think there are more of us? How many patients did she exploit? I'd been wondering the same thing. The book had 22 chapters. We'd identified ourselves in maybe half of them. That meant at least 10, 15 other chapters came from somewhere. Other patients. Other people's trauma packaged and sold. I called Judith Monday morning and told her about Lauren. She said we should try to find more. She suggested posting in online therapy forums, reaching out to patient advocacy groups, maybe even contacting journalists who covered mental health issues. I spent my evening searching online for anything about Dr. Reese. Found her Twitter account where she posted inspirational quotes and promoted her book. Found interviews where she discussed her clinical experience and how honored she felt to witness her patients' healing journeys. The comments were full of praise, people calling her brave, thanking her for reducing stigma, saying her book changed their lives. One comment caught my attention. A woman named Ashley had written, "Chapter 19 hit me so hard. That story about postpartum depression could have been my story. Made me feel so seen." I clicked on Ashley's profile and sent her a private message. Explained who I was, what I'd discovered, asked if she'd been Dr. Reese's patient. She responded within an hour. Yes, 2 years ago. How did you know? We arranged a phone call and Ashley confirmed what I suspected. Chapter 19 was her story. Dr. Reese had described Ashley's postpartum depression, her thoughts of harming her baby, her husband's reaction, her hospitalization, changed enough details to avoid obvious identification but kept the emotional core identical. Ashley was the third victim we'd found. I gave her Judith's contact information and she agreed to join the complaint. Over the next 2 months, I found 5 more. Some responded to posts I made in therapy forums. Some were friends of friends who'd heard through word of mouth. One woman contacted me after seeing a local news story about therapist ethics violations that mentioned Dr. Reese's name without details. Each of them had the same story. They'd been in crisis, sought help from Dr. Reese, trusted her completely, and later found their trauma published in her best-selling book. Some recognized themselves immediately. Others hadn't connected the dots until someone pointed it out. All of them felt violated, angry, betrayed. We formed a group chat and started meeting monthly. 8 women who'd all been exploited by the same therapist. The licensing board investigation was moving slowly. They'd contacted Dr. Reese for her response, and she'd hired a lawyer who filed motions for extensions. Months passed. Meanwhile, her book continued selling. She did a book tour in June, speaking at bookstores and libraries about the power of storytelling and healing trauma. The irony would have been funny if it wasn't so enraging. I went to one of her readings in July, sat in the back of the bookstore while she read from Chapter 7, the one about my father. Listened to her describe his suicide in her polished voice while the audience sat rapt. During the quanda, someone asked how she got such detailed stories from her patients. Dr. Reese smiled warmly. I've been privileged to work with hundreds of brave individuals over my career. The stories in this book represent composite experiences drawn from that clinical work, always with careful attention to protecting privacy and maintaining ethical standards. She said it so smoothly, such a practiced liar. I stood up from my seat in the back. That's not true. You used identifiable patient stories without consent. I was your patient and I recognize my trauma throughout this book. The room went silent. Everyone turned to look at me. Dr. Reese's face remained calm, but her eyes went cold. I'm sorry you're experiencing distress. As I mentioned, these are composite cases. If you're seeing yourself in universal trauma narratives, that speaks to the commonality of these experiences. It's not because I've violated any confidentiality. A man in the front row spoke up. Are you saying this woman is lying? Dr. Reese closed her book carefully. I'm saying she's mistaken. Trauma survivors often have difficulty with memory and perception. It's part of the healing process to work through those distortions. I felt my face flush hot. She was doing it again, using psychological language to discredit me in public. I have documentation, dates of sessions, specific details I told you that appear in your book. My father's exact last words are on page 127. The bookstore manager stepped forward, clearly uncomfortable. Maybe we should take this offline. This isn't the right forum for personal disputes. Dr. Reese agreed quickly. Yes, let's respect everyone's time. I'm happy to discuss this privately with you afterward if you'd like to stay. She wasn't going to discuss anything. She was going to berate me for making a scene, probably threaten me with a harassment claim. I walked out of the bookstore shaking with rage and adrenaline, sat in my car for 20 minutes trying to calm down. My phone buzzed with a text from Lauren. I saw what you did. Someone posted a video on Twitter. I opened Twitter and found the clip. Someone had filmed my confrontation with Dr. Reese. It had 15,000 views already. The comments were mixed. Some people praised me for speaking up. Others called me delusional, attention-seeking, clearly mentally unstable. One comment said I was trying to destroy a brilliant woman's career because I was jealous of her success. The video went viral over the weekend, hit 200,000 views. Several mental health influencers weighed in, most of them defending Dr. Reese and condemning me for publicly attacking a therapist. They said I was violating her privacy by disclosing our therapeutic relationship. They said I clearly needed help and was lashing out at someone who'd tried to support me. The irony was suffocating. She'd violated my privacy by publishing my trauma, but I was the bad guy for naming her publicly. Monday morning, Judith called. The video is actually helpful for our case. It shows you were willing to confront her directly, which demonstrates genuine belief in your claims. It also might bring more victims forward. People see that video and realize they're not alone. She was right. Over the next week, 3 more former patients contacted me. They'd all recognized themselves in the book but hadn't known what to do about it. Seeing my confrontation made them feel brave enough to speak up. We were at 11 victims now. Judith said that was enough to move forward with a class action lawsuit. She filed it in late August. The lawsuit named Dr. Caroline Reese and her publisher Beacon Press as defendants. It alleged breach of confidentiality, malpractice, emotional distress, and unjust enrichment. The publisher immediately released a statement saying they'd relied on Dr. Reese's assurances that all cases in the book were adequately disguised composites. They claimed they'd followed standard publishing practices and had no way of knowing she'd violated patient confidentiality. Dr. Reese's lawyer released a statement calling the lawsuit frivolous and defamatory. He said Dr. Reese had helped hundreds of patients throughout her career, and these accusations were attempts to profit from her success. The statement specifically called me out as the instigator, describing me as a former patient with documented mental health issues who is projecting her unresolved trauma onto her former therapist. That language, documented mental health issues, was clearly designed to discredit me. Of course I had mental health issues. That's why I'd gone to therapy. That's why I'd been vulnerable enough for Dr. Reese to exploit. Using my diagnosis against me was another layer of betrayal. The lawsuit moved through preliminary stages. Discovery was scheduled to begin in October. That meant we'd get access to Dr. Reese's clinical notes, her correspondence with the publisher, her manuscript drafts, everything that would prove she'd used real patient stories rather than composites. Dr. Reese fought the discovery requests hard. Her lawyer argued that clinical notes were privileged and protected. Judith argued that privilege was waived when Dr. Reese published the material publicly. The judge sided with us, ordered Dr. Reese to turn over all clinical notes for patients who were part of the lawsuit, all drafts of her manuscript, and all correspondence with Beacon Press. The notes arrived in November, boxes of photocopied pages. Judith's team went through them systematically, matching notes from our sessions to passages in the published book. The correlation was undeniable. My session from April 3rd, where I discussed my father's suicide, matched almost word for word with Chapter 7. Lauren's session from June 18th, where she described her mother's death and the yellow blanket, matched Chapter 12. Every one of us could trace specific passages in the book back to specific therapy sessions. Dr. Reese had barely changed anything. She just altered names, ages, locations. The emotional content was lifted directly from her notes. Even more damning, we found her correspondence with her publisher. An email from her to her editor at Beacon Press said, "I'm pulling these cases directly from my current practice. The rawness and detail are what make it compelling. Don't worry about the composite issue. I'm changing enough that no one will recognize themselves." Another email showed the editor expressing concern. "Are you sure these patients have signed releases? Some of these stories are very specific." Dr. Reese replied, "These women came to me in crisis. They trust me completely. They won't read the book, and even if they do, they'll be flattered to have their stories help others. This is standard practice in clinical writing." The emails proved intent. She knew she was using identifiable stories. She knew she should have gotten consent. She did it anyway because she wanted the book to be successful and raw. Real patient stories sold better than sanitized composites. Judith filed the emails as evidence and sent copies to the licensing board to support our ethics complaint. The licensing board accelerated their investigation. December brought depositions. I had to sit across from Dr. Reese and her lawyers and answer questions about my therapy, my trauma, my mental health history. They tried to make me look unstable, asked about my depression, my anxiety, my medications, suggested I had a pattern of misinterpreting reality and blaming others for my problems. Judith objected repeatedly, but I still had to sit there while they picked apart my vulnerability. Dr. Reese's deposition happened the following week. Judith destroyed her, went line by line through the book and the clinical notes, asking Dr. Reese to explain the similarities. "Did you or did you not write in your clinical notes from April 3rd that your patient's father said, 'Tell your mother I'm sorry I couldn't be the man she needed,' before his suicide?" Dr. Reese shifted in her seat. "That's what she reported, yes," Judith continued. "And on page 127 of your book, the father character says, 'Tell your mother I'm sorry I couldn't be the man she needed.' Those are the same words." "How is that a composite?" Dr. Reese's lawyer interjected, but Judith pressed on. "You told your publisher these were real cases from your current practice. You said the rawness and detail made them compelling. Did you get consent from any of these patients to publish their stories?" Dr. Reese looked at her lawyer, who nodded. "No, I didn't believe I needed consent because I changed identifying details." Judith held up the clinical notes. "You changed names and ages. You didn't change the emotional core, the specific traumas, the identifying details that made these women recognizable to themselves and people who knew them. You exploited their vulnerability for profit." The deposition lasted 6 hours. By the end, Dr. Reese looked exhausted and rattled. She'd maintained her composure, but the evidence was overwhelming. The licensing board issued their findings in January. They found Dr. Reese had violated multiple ethical standards, including patient confidentiality, informed consent, and exploitation of the therapeutic relationship. They revoked her license effective immediately and fined her $50,000. She could appeal but couldn't practice during the appeal process. The public report was scathing. It specifically noted that Dr. Reese demonstrated a pattern of using identifiable patient information for personal gain while misleading patients about the confidential nature of treatment. Her conduct represents a serious breach of trust and professional ethics. The report was public record. Media outlets picked it up immediately. Psychology Today ran a story titled, "Best-Selling Therapist Loses License Over Patient Exploitation." NPR did a segment about ethics in clinical writing. The story gained traction because Dr. Reese had been so visible. Her fall from grace was dramatic and public. Beacon Press released a statement saying they were suspending publication of the book pending the outcome of the lawsuit. That was PR speak for pulling it from stores. Online retailers removed it from their catalogs. Dr. Reese's speaking engagements were canceled. Her verified Twitter account went quiet. The lawsuit settled in March. Dr. Reese's insurance company and Beacon Press agreed to pay $2.8 million to be divided among the 11 plaintiffs. It worked out to about $255,000 each before legal fees. The settlement included non-disparagement clauses, meaning we couldn't publicly discuss the terms, but nothing prevented us from discussing the underlying facts. No amount of money would undo what she'd done, but the financial penalty was significant enough to hurt. More importantly, the settlement required Beacon Press to permanently cease publication of the book and to pulp all remaining copies. Dr. Reese had to return her advance and forfeit all royalties. The book that had made her famous would be erased from circulation as much as possible. Used copies would still exist, but no new ones would be printed. Her career was effectively over. April brought some closure. The 11 of us met for dinner at a restaurant downtown to mark the settlement. We'd been through something terrible together and come out the other side. Lauren raised her glass for a toast. To surviving twice, first our original traumas, then the person who was supposed to help us heal from them. We clinked glasses and I felt something loosen in my chest. Not forgiveness, not even full healing, but acknowledgement that we'd fought back and won. I started seeing a new therapist in May. Dr. Patel came highly recommended and had no connection to Dr. Reese. Our first session was hard. I cried explaining why I was there, why trust was so difficult now. Dr. Patel listened without interrupting and then said something that helped. What happened to you was a profound betrayal by someone who held power over you during vulnerability. That's not a reflection of therapy as a practice. It's a reflection of one unethical person who weaponized the therapeutic relationship. Real therapy can still help you. You just need someone worthy of your trust. I went back the next week and the week after. Slowly, carefully, I started to rebuild what Dr. Reese had broken. The nightmares about my father faded. The shame about my abuse lifted. The fear that had controlled me since the assault started loosening its grip. This was what therapy was supposed to be. A place to heal, not a place to be harvested. By summer, I'd started speaking publicly about what happened. Did a podcast interview about patient rights and therapist ethics. Wrote an op-ed for a mental health website about power dynamics in treatment. The responses were overwhelming. Hundreds of people reached out sharing their own stories of therapeutic boundary violations. Not all as extreme as mine, but all damaging. All examples of therapists who'd forgotten their fundamental duty to do no harm. Dr. Reese appealed the license revocation, but lost in October. The appeals board upheld every finding and added language about her persistent refusal to accept responsibility for her actions. She'd tried to paint herself as the victim of a witch hunt by unstable former patients. The board didn't buy it. With her license permanently revoked and her book out of print, she had no career left. I heard through mutual connections that she'd moved to another state and was working in marketing. The woman who'd built an empire on other people's pain was now writing ad copy. The universe had a sense of irony. November marked 2 years since I'd first opened her book in that Barnes & Noble. 2 years since I'd recognized my father's words on page 127 and realized my therapist had betrayed me. I was different now. Angrier, but also stronger. Less trusting, but more discerning. I'd learned that not all helpers actually help. That credentials don't equal character. That sometimes the people who promise to heal you are the ones who hurt you most. But I'd also learned I could survive that betrayal. Could fight back. Could win. The settlement money helped, but vindication mattered more. Knowing that Dr. Reese lost everything she'd stolen from us. Knowing that other therapists would read about her case and think twice before exploiting their patients. I still have my copy of Healing Through Darkness on my bookshelf. Not as inspiration, but as a reminder. A reminder that my trauma belonged to me, not her. That my father's last words were mine to carry, not hers to sell. That my healing was my journey, not her content. Sometimes I flip through it and feel the rage again, sharp and clean. But mostly I feel nothing. She's irrelevant now. Her book is out of print. Her license is gone. Her reputation is destroyed. The story she tried to write for herself, the story of the brilliant therapist who helped so many people, ended differently than she planned. Instead, she became a cautionary tale about what happens when you exploit the people who trust you most. When you weaponize vulnerability. When you forget that some things are sacred and not for sale. The real story, my story, is that I survived. First the traumas she wrote about, then the trauma she caused, and I'm still here, still healing, still fighting. That's the ending she never saw coming. Thanks for watching till the end. Make sure to subscribe and like to not miss the next story.